Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter. Now Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him, and he said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be the manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses.' So, summoning the master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said, 'Then take out your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Apparently Mammon doesn't want me telling you you can't serve both God and Mammon. Cut out the mic there. Shortly after moving to Texas, we all remember Houston and other Gulf communities were bombarded with Hurricane Harvey. And one company that jumped into the middle of this was HEB. And Texas Monthly writes this, that HEB employs a full-time director of emergency preparedness is unusual but not unheard of. Other groceries do as well in order to make sure supply chains work. But the existence of disaster relief, HEB has 3 mobile kitchens, a disaster relief unit that offers services, and 2 water tankers is something that may be unique among retailers. And while it's not HEB's job to take on relief duties in communities ravaged by events like Harvey, the chain prides itself on its emergency response and its support. Now, in no way am I saying this sermon was sponsored by HEB. I love HEB. I certainly enjoy going to HEB. And I'm not saying that HEB and the Church of Jesus Christ aren't one and the same. Our color schemes are different. However, the motivations of a corporation's charity can give us some insight into what Jesus is talking about in this parable, which presents itself to be very puzzling right there on the surface. In order to understand it, we should think, number one, about who the audience is here, what they are receiving, and finally, what is the main purpose. You know, so much confusion happens in the Bible when we don't read carefully. So much confusion happens in the Bible when we don't understand who the audience of a particular statement is. And here, in this case, this story is meant not so much for the world, though the world can read it for all they like. The Bible is the most published book in the world. Or the Pharisees, though they were eavesdropping here, so they heard the parable. But rather, the intended audience here was the disciples, the people following behind Jesus. And indeed today, the people gathered around the globe, listening and reading their Bibles. Christ is laying something out that we'll have to return to here, and we'll come to that a little bit later. Now, I confess that we often bring our own assumptions to this particular passage in the Bible. It's not the easiest one. In fact, many pastors lament at this parable because on the surface, when we kind of read into it, we read into it all of these assumptions, but if you read the passage clearly, there's a lot of assumptions that we make that Jesus certainly doesn't say. So let me give you an example. For me, when I thought about this, when I have thought about the jobs that I have not had, I've lost, they've been because of downsizing. And downsizing is something that happens all over in America, but we're never told that he was downsized. In fact, we're told quite the opposite. We're told he's been a bad steward with the finances here. So reading what Jesus says is more important than reading what we want Jesus to say. He is letting this person go because he's no good at his job. We think the Lord is downsizing, but we miss the reports of the people coming to this Lord, telling him of all the mismanagement and problems facing this manager. We're not told that the man has been stealing the master's money either, but we are told that he has not been using it in the way the master wants him to use it. Now, we can all get behind someone firing someone who's an embezzler. But what we're told here in this passage is the fact that this person is just not good at using the money. And where that money goes is less important than how the Lord wants this steward to use that money. That's something we have to bear in mind. This man has been, from the get-go to now, has been worried about his position. He's been worried about his position. He begins to realize that what he has been working for is now in doubt. He's been working either for the master's bottom line or to line his own pockets. He's been working for the master's bottom line or to line his own pockets. Those are really the only two options we have here. Now, we've all seen the people who think that the best way to make a corporation or a business work is to just maximize the bottom line. And what we've noticed by that is when your focus is singularly about maximizing the bottom line, you have unhappy employees, you have unhappy customers, and ultimately any wealth that you accrue is lost and squandered. It's a temporary thing because you're not investing in people. When you invest in people, the people will actually bear good fruit, if you will, for your corporation, for your business. Now, with his mindset confronted and with the threat of being kicked out of his job, he begins to think about his position differently. When now it's not about the bottom line, whether that assists him or assists the Lord, as he thinks. Now it's about relationships. And the fact that he has built his bottom line on relationship, over and against relationships. He now sees that these ideas are not going to save him. His bottom line is not going to save him. Recent studies, if you ever pick up a business magazine, quite to the contrary of very gruff and blustery sorts of individuals, quite to the contrary of what they may say, one of the ways you can tell if a business is going to succeed and to see like a good business culture points out that successful companies, time and again, are those that stay on top, and they are the ones that look outward to their community. They're the ones that work on fostering relationships rather than just focusing on their bottom line. It's like the one line from Citizen Kane, where he's going to meet with Kane's business advisor, and he says, Thatcher, who was this banker, is a fool. And he said, well, he made a lot of money. He says, well, it's not hard to make a lot of money. If all you want to do is make a lot of money. It's not hard to make a lot of money to just get into some sort of business that's going to give you a good return. But you're not leaving anything behind if that's all you're focused on. And this brings us to the final point of the parable. As the Lord now commends the servant for his shrewdness, and the shrewdness has a self-interest in origin. But here's the thing. He looks inside himself, thinks, what's the most important thing for me now that I'm about ready to lose my job? And he goes and does this thing, which is actually slashing the prices that are supposed to be given to his Lord. This seems counterintuitive. And why is this Lord commending him? The Lord is commending him, probably, we can assume, because this is what he should have been doing the entire time. You know, if we think about it, this has gone on probably for years. He's charged the full amount. He's put the screws on people who can't pay up. And what does this do to people? This person is the face of the Lord. This is the only contact these people probably have with the Lord, is this manager. And if this is the only contact they have with the Lord, then what does that say about their relationship to the Lord? So whatever he's been doing, however that money, wherever that money's been going, he has been giving the Lord a bad name by being so stingy with these prices. Whereas now that he's slashed these prices, now that he's asked people to pay less, now they have not just a good opinion of the shrewd manager, but they have a good opinion of the Lord as well. Thus the commendation of the shrewd manager for his shrewdness, because he put relationships, he invested in those relationships, knowing that if the prices were cut here, where they could be cut, and not just keeping to the letter of the law, he's now built up a good rapport so that people are more willing to borrow and to owe fealty, if you will, to this Lord as well. Now, Jesus then explains what this is all about. And he explains this to the disciples. Remember, I said we would be coming back to whom this is about later on. Well, this is that point. Jesus then explains what this is all about. If this careless and incompetent steward can learn to give charitably when faced with the simple loss of his job, how much more should the followers of Christ, and indeed we, the stewards of the gospel, be willing to charitably give out the blessings of the gospel, if for no other reason that the end of all things definitely clarifies the mission and goal of what it means to be a Christian. If at the end of all things we come before God and we have not been good stewards with the gospel, we must really think about this. Indeed, our lesson in Amos today also talks about the end of all things. Now, listen, You are not saved. You are not saved by your works. I need to reiterate that every single time. You are not saved by your works. But if we know that it is good to give charitably of money, how much more should we know that it is good to give charitably of this gospel message? If we know that it is good to share things with people who may have made some bad decisions in their life, how much more is it imperative for the Christian to share the gospel message with everyone with whom we come in contact? Jesus' point is clear. Even looking at the companies, and again, HEB is not a Christian organization, though it may have Christians in its hierarchy. If we look at companies and people who do good things, seeing how they build reputation and seeing how they build loyalty by using unrighteous wealth, how can we sit on the eternal wealth that is the gospel? He who is a good steward with unrighteous wealth must be a good steward with eternal wealth. Of this small thing that is doomed to fade away when we pass on, versus this eternal thing which we will constantly look to as our own salvation for eternity. Furthermore, we Christians know that This is important, so into the pulpit I go. Furthermore, we Christians know that all the gifts in this world are temporary and they're transitory. But the Christian, after taking inventory, knows there is one thing he or she possesses that is truly eternal, and also truly his or her own. And that thing is the gospel message. Christ's challenge, therefore, is to this point. If we aren't willing to bless others with earthly goods, it can't be expected that we will have the same impetus to bless them with eternal goods of the gospel. And the reason for this is simple, not because we are justified by our works, but because we have not taken God's mercy seriously. This is the point of this message, this gospel message. The point of this message is for us to look and think about our own lives. Have we really shared the good news? Or have we instead been so afraid, have we projected an assumption of God as some Lord who's willing to put the screws on us for every time we don't come back with a return on His investment? Have we simply been putting money in the bank, saving up for a rainy day, instead of investing in our neighbor, investing in eternity? You know, if we look around at the churches that succeed and the churches that fail, the biggest difference is the churches that fail represent the steward before he thinks about eternity. But the churches that succeed, good night. The churches that succeed are the churches that think about eternity and place eternity at the center. Now again, folks, I definitely believe that Mammon does not want you to hear this message. The Lord wants you to invest in your neighbor, invest in your family, invest in your community, invest in your state, in your nation. Everywhere you can invest with the gospel message. Invest, 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 even if it costs you, even if you have to slash prices, even if sacred cows have to be removed, put away. Invest in that. Keep to the central message of the gospel. And let everything else fade away. These are complicated. This is a complicated parable, but what Jesus is trying to say, what Jesus is looking to remind us, is that sometimes we get so fixated on making our churches look beautiful that we forget to make our churches look appealing to a world in need. Sometimes we look for our frills and our benefits of being on the inside that we forget to look and see how that may look for the outside. There may be times when we gather together in a holy huddle, investing, trying to bring our Master what was His in the beginning, that we forget to invest what the Master has entrusted to us with the world outside. And so as we go on our way this week, as we leave the doors of the church and the safety of the pews, let us instead remember what Christ is telling us. God does not need your good works, says Luther, but your neighbor does. Let us remember that the way that we demonstrate the gospel is not that we are saved by our works, but we get to do good works because Christ has entrusted you and me with our good works. Let us not forget the examples, not just of the saints, but of the corporations like H-E-B, that know that if they invest a little bit of transitory wealth, they make whatever they are selling, whatever they are demonstrating, look that much more desirable to people. Amen.